Hey, um, I don't think I've made this kind of video in a long time. Probably still wouldn't in the near future. But I had something to talk about today, so I decided to make a video about it because I've been thinking about this for myself. I think I have some thoughts around how I've been able to do this that I was sharing. So the video is basically going to be about how to build discipline. There's two ways I generally know how to do so, and I'm going to share those two ways. And if you find that it's valuable to you, apply them, use it however you like in your life. If it's not valuable, perhaps I hope you find something that's valuable. And yeah, that's it. So basically, the video is going to be about I'm talking about how to build discipline, and this has been important for me because since like I've been recently trying to get back into work, and I realized that I'm not like as disciplined as I typically am. So generally, people tend to think I'm a very disciplined person to some degree because I do a lot of things. There's output from my work. I'm always doing one thing or the other and completing it and putting it out there and stuff. But personally, I've had like a life that's helped me develop discipline, or has forced me to develop discipline. And to some degree, today, I think it has ebbed and flowed at different points in my life. So sometimes I'm more disciplined, sometimes other times I'm less disciplined. It's depending on how much hedonism I'm willing to bring into my life, right? But so let's just talk about it. There's two ways I think you can generally build discipline. There's one I would call the brute force method, and there's the other I would call the more pragmatic approach. Now, the both methods generally would apply to two different kinds of people, but like I think if there's some people who can overlap, right? Personally, I've worked with both methods at different points in my life, and I think they work just fine, depending on how like invested you are in the process. Now, the first one I'm going to talk about is the brute force method, generally because that's the first way I feel like I developed discipline, and it's probably not something most people will recommend. Lots of people are very, very, I'd say delicate and sensitive and believe they should treat themselves so nicely and give themselves all the best things of the world. If that's you, that's okay. That was not me at the time, and I don't think that's still me. So generally, the brute force method is this: make a pact with yourself that whenever you have that struggle in your head to say yes or no to something, you would always go the logical route. An example is this, right? Now, typically, when you think about discipline, discipline is generally like a struggle within yourself to choose a certain path. And always there's like the logical path that is typically good for you, and there's the other part that your mind or like some part of your the part of you that is willing to prioritize pleasure would probably go for, right? So that's what we're dealing with here. Now, generally, my whole thing is that the most indisciplined people I know, or when I'm in my own most indisciplined state, there's two ways that conversation goes in my head, right? Either one, it ends very quickly with pleasure winning. So it's like, hey, I'm back from work. I need to, oh no, let's say you're not back from work. Let's say you're back home. You have some work you're supposed to complete before tomorrow, or you could watch that series on the TV. Now, the more indisciplined you are, the faster that decision is going to be, and it's going to be a loss to the TV. So it means you're like, the conversation goes on for a short while, and then you're like, oh, TV wins. Now, there's another group also that would have that conversation for a long while, but then TV wins. That's just as indisciplined. And it's probably even more inefficient because now you're spending a longer time to reach the same conclusion. You might as well have done it earlier, right? So, what I've tried to do for myself is make those conversations much shorter and do way less reasoning about it. Now, the only reason you are able to justify the actions you may take from there, which is like, oh, you think about this for so long, and at some point you just tell yourself somehow that you would see the movie now and do the work at night, even though you know you'll be so tired and you might sleep off from watching the movie. The only reason you're able to deceive yourself is that the conversation is even up for debate. So the brute force method says whenever you encounter such a situation, do not think about it, go open your laptop and do the work you need to do. I've done that a lot in the various areas of my life, and that has kind of like changed a lot of things for me that's built that kind of discipline. A clear example of how I did this when I was much younger, and I've told this story to a few people, is that I realized I didn't like the relationship I had with movies, because I would sit with my family, siblings, whoever, anybody I was watching TV with, and then I would realize how we were hung on to every second of the movie, and it's like they were playing these games with our emotions, where there's suspense and there's like, oh, we want to see the next season. So you finish and you're like, okay, I'll do it after. You're like, okay, I'll do this after this episode, and then you get to the end of the episode, but they've left something you want to find out in the next episode, so you end up watching the next episode. I didn't like the relationship I had with that, because generally I don't like to be hung on to things. So what I did was I struck a pact to myself that whenever I get to the most interesting part of any movie I watched, I would just switch off the TV and go do something else. And so I did that for a long while, as psychotic as that may sound, or psychopath, whatever. But as bad as that may sound, what's this? It doesn't matter, to be honest. I did that for a long while, and then over time, I became very capable of turning off pleasure for the sake of whatever I felt like I needed to do in the moment. So even if I was at the hottest part, the action moment, all of that stuff, I would switch it off and I would go on. But the beauty about discipline also, which ties into the second way of building discipline, is that discipline is something that permeates other aspects of your life. So when you build discipline in one way, it's because, like, at the core, discipline is the same thing. It's the ability to navigate and say yes or no and make more logical and practical choices for your life versus prioritize pleasure, right? So once you can build it in one thing, generally it goes into every other thing. So I became better at doing lots of other things. A good way this showed up in my life earlier on is, like, I became very good at, like, saying no to girls to some degree. It's not a flex, don't take it that seriously. But the idea is that generally, again, any dynamic where generally you are slave to some desire that often prioritizes pleasure, it is important for you as a person, and I think more important, more specifically in my own context as a man, to be capable of saying no to your sexual pleasure, no matter how it's served on a platter, saying no to sensory pleasure, no matter how it's served on a platter. And the more you build that muscle, the better you are making these decisions quicker and faster. So brute force method, in summary, is remove the conversation. It's not up for debate. Always go for the practical thing, and when you do that over time, it becomes less of a conversation and just, like, fades away that way, such that you just know to do the right thing irrespective of the pleasure you may have derived. Now, I must prefix this with the problem with this method. Now, this method is very important, to be fair. I think it's the most efficient for people that are relatively obsessive, or at least to some degree as obsessive as I am. So you can just, like, obsess about solving this and get it done. The challenge or the consequence of this method, however, is that at some point in time, you find that you lack the ability to now enjoy your life, which happened to me. I think I'm probably still figuring out bits of that. But eventually, your life becomes very calculated and monotonous, which is great for most things, but for a more joyful experience of the world, it's better to be more in control of that as well. So in an attempt to correct one deficiency, that's like an overcorrecting. So you need to be watchful of that if you're doing it. But however, if you're like me, you probably would do it still anyway. Okay? So I had to fix that. Now, that's something I think you would not encounter with the second approach. So the second approach is what I call a more practical and more step-by-step approach. Generally, because, like I said, discipline is something that permeates every aspect of your life. It means that you could build discipline in smaller things and have that cascade up into bigger things, or have that, like, accrue into bigger things. And there's two ways you can do this, right? For example, I've forgotten the book I read that had this. I suspect it's Atomic Habits. But one of the things you could do with building habits is, or building discipline or doing something, is try to reduce the friction to executing whatever you have in mind, right? And now you may think about executing the friction as some big thing, but for me, like, it's a lot simpler. Let's say what you wanted to do is read a chapter of a book every day. Now there's a lot of friction on your way to getting that done. One, you generally probably don't like reading as much. Two, you haven't built the discipline to be able to get yourself to do things that you don't enjoy as much just yet. Now, you need to get set a lot of things in your favor so that you potentially can reach the goal and then build momentum based off that. One of the things you could do in this situation is to always make sure the book is by your bed. So it's very accessible, and potentially you could just grab it at every point in time, just before you sleep or right after you wake up. Another thing you could do here is start with a smaller goal. Rather than say you want to read a chapter of the book, maybe make a thing I read, which I don't remember where I read also, is make the goal initially so stupid that there's no chance you don't complete it. For example, if I wanted to read a whole chapter, then my goal could just be, read a line of this book every morning. And it sounds so stupid, like a line, what could I do with a line? But please read the line first. And you find that once you get yourself to read the line, it's so stupid to you that you're reading just one line that eventually you read more lines. So ultimately, you game yourself to some degree into achieving the long-term goal of becoming a more avid reader, right? And so it's like, and try this. If somebody that's trying to build a reading, then make sure you read, instead of reading one chapter, just read one line. Wake up in the morning and read one line, and even if that line is stupid and it doesn't make sense, like it's not a complete sentence, then stop at the end of the line, you break it. And do that for like 2-3 days consistently, and then next time read a sentence, right? And then next time read a paragraph, and then next time read a page. And then you realize that eventually, as long as you keep like accruing that discipline, you build the muscle required to take on more load, and hopefully eventually in the long run get to the goal you are going for. So that's one way you could do this. Another way you could do this, actually, which, I mean, this thing is very practical. I find that some of the things that we should be doing have been told to us and rang in our head in many ways, but we just don't tend to apply it across the spectrum of ways that we could apply this thing. So you've been growing up, you probably heard charity begins at home. You probably heard he that is faithful in little will be faithful in much. All of these are the same principles in some way, just like expressed differently, looked at from this different vantage points. But in line with that, another thing you could do to be like a more step-by-step approach could be basically building discipline in something that is smaller and even unrelated, right? For example, I'm trying to build discipline where I want to code. Yeah, I want to write code for an hour every day. However, I have not been able to do this. Like I mentioned previously, one way you could do that is like deciding to write code for 1 minute, or deciding to write one line of code, like break it down, or build discipline. And this is in general, build discipline in something else that is small, e.g., making your bed every day you wake up. And you find that because discipline is something that permeates your life, if you can generally build discipline to force yourself to make your bed, over time you build discipline to make stronger decisions. So it starts from you being able to force yourself to make your bed, and before you know, you're able to force yourself to have your bath every day at a specific time. Before you know, you're able to get yourself to do some coding at a specific time. Like it mounts up, it builds up. You're able to get yourself to work out for a few minutes. Like pick something else that is easier and smaller. Something, because discipline is discipline. It's like being a good engineer in general. I believe that no matter what you pick up, even if you've never done it before, you figure it out in a couple of hours, or if you're dedicated enough, or maybe in a couple of days, whatever. But like, as long as you understand in code the general principles, you would make sense of it at some point, and you get it done, because the principles are applicable across all kinds of things. Again, I digress, but back to the point. The point is, you can build discipline in something unrelated, and it will still affect whatever you're trying to build, everything else. And check the most disciplined people you know. You find that you might know them to be disciplined people at work, but if you look deeper into their lives, that has permeated other aspects of their lives, and they would be disciplined at those things too. There would be people that potentially function on a routine. They have a set of things they are into and a set of things they don't do. There's non-negotiables. There's just some level of monotonousness to their lives, and people will tell you monotony is not great. But again, you need to think for yourself. If your goal is to be more disciplined, then you need some level of monotony and structure to your life. And then when you master that, potentially you want to also reserve the rights to be able to remove that structure when you need to have fun. So you want to be able to do both. But optimizing for, I always like using the word hedonism, because that's what I feel like we're doing these days. Everyone is optimizing for, I came here to enjoy my life. I want to live my best life. Fuck everybody, no responsibility to society or friends or the world at large, if you optimize so much for that, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And maybe that's the life you want. Maybe you don't care about like your goals. Maybe you don't want to even want to have any goals. Maybe you want to have enjoyment goals, like finishing 10 plates of rice, or like lots of visiting everywhere, all the fun places in the world, all the fun clubs. Whatever your goal is, if that's it, it's all good. But if you're interested in achieving things that are somewhat more unnatural, somewhat more difficult to that require you to tame yourself to some degree to achieve, then I think these are points that you might find valuable. Yeah, that's it. There's not much to this video beyond that. I hope you found whatever I said valuable to some degree. If you didn't, that's okay. But if you did, yeah, let me know what things you're trying to build discipline at in the comment section, and how you would be applying any of this to your situation. And yeah, if you have other techniques that have helped you discipline yourself at doing things, please share in the comment section. I'm open to learning new stuff, and I think other people will benefit from knowing too. So yeah, that's it. Peace.